These are drinking cups that could kill the men who made them. In the 4th century AD, Roman glassworkers took solid blocks of glass and carved away almost all of it. What's left is a free-floating cage, connected to the cup underneath by nothing but a few dozen glass bridges, each one thinner than a matchstick. One wrong angle of the cutting wheel, one moment of bad pressure, and months of work turned to sand on the workshop floor. They're called Vasa diatreta, cage cups, and fewer than 50 of them survive today, most in fragments. Only around 10 are anywhere close to complete. That scarcity tells you something. This wasn't a technique that spread across the empire and got mass-produced. It was a specialty so difficult that only a handful of workshops ever mastered it, and even they couldn't do it reliably. Look at how a normal Roman drinking cup got made. A glassblower, a vitrarius, shapes molten glass on the end of a blowpipe, and the vessel is done in minutes. A cage cup starts the same way, but that's where normal ends. Once the blank cools, it goes to a completely different craftsman, the diatretarius, the cutter. His job is to take a thick-walled glass blank and grind almost all of it away with abrasive wheels, working from the outside in until what's left is a network of rings, dots, and lettering that appears to float a few millimeters above the inner cup, held up by nothing but short, stone-cut struts. Do the math on that. Glass doesn't bend. It doesn't forgive mistakes. A stone carver working marble can lose a chip and adjust the design. A cage cup carver working glass has one shot per bridge, cut too deep, and the strut snaps, and there's no fixing it. The whole vessel is ruined, and they weren't cutting one or two struts. Complete cage cups have dozens of them, each one carved from the same solid mass as the rest of the cup. Not to for nearly 3.5 centuries, historians agreed on how this got done. Pure subtraction. Take a thick blob of glass and cut away everything that isn't cup and cage. That theory dates back to 1680, and it stayed the default explanation because it matches something the Romans and Greeks already knew how to do. Hard stone carving, the same skill used on engraved gems and semi-prepare stone. If you can cut a portrait into a chunk of onyx, in theory you can cut a cage into a chunk of glass. It's just brutally slower, and the margin for error is smaller. But that theory has a problem, and it's one that's resurfaced in the last few decades. Some cage cups show smooth, fused joins between the cage and the cup body. Joins that look less like the product of grinding and more like two separately made pieces that were heated and fused together while hot. Recent analysis of fragments from Grenoble, examined for tool marks left behind on the glass itself, points toward a more complex process, possibly a pressed or partially preformed blank, then finished with cutting, rather than cutting from a solid block start to finish. The debate isn't settled. What is settled is that whichever method was used, it required control over molten and solid glass workers still study and struggle to replicate. And then there's the cup that outdoes all of them, the Lycurgus Cup, now in the British Museum. It's the only cage cup that survives essentially whole, and it does something none of the others do. Hold it up to reflected light, and it's jade green. Shine light through it from behind, and it turns blood red. For a long time, nobody could explain that shift. Then, in the 1990s, researchers put fragments under an electron microscope and found the answer embedded in the glass itself. Nanoparticles of gold and silver, roughly 50 nanometers across, about 1/1000th the width of a human hair, suspended through the glass in a ratio of roughly 7 parts silver to 3 parts gold. At that scale, gold and silver don't behave like gold and silver. They interact with light in a completely different way, scattering some wavelengths and letting others pass straight through, which is exactly why the cup changes color depending on whether light is bouncing off it or shining through it. This is a phenomenon called plasmon resonance, and it wasn't formally described by science until the 20th century. The Romans who made the Lycurgus Cup were working with it in the 300s AD. There's no evidence they understood why it worked. What they had was generations of accumulated glassmaking knowledge, a willingness to add tiny, precisely measured amounts of precious metal into a glass batch, parts per million, not a pinch, and enough trial and error to land on a formula that worked, at least once. As far as anyone can tell, they never fully replicated it. No other cage cup shows this effect at this level. Put those two things together, and the cage cups stop looking like simple luxury drinkware. They're closer to a lost engineering discipline, a vessel that's structurally almost impossible to make, using a coloring technique nobody else in the ancient world had figured out, produced by workshops we can't even locate with certainty. Candidates include the Rhineland and parts of Italy, but the truth is, nobody knows exactly where the diatretarii worked, or how their skills were passed down, or why the technique essentially disappears from the historical record after the 4th century. There's a story about how seriously Romans took these cups. The Emperor Hadrian, writing in the 2nd century, describes sending 2 color-changing glass goblets to family members as a personal gift, warning them not to let anyone use them too freely at feasts. These weren't cups you handed to just anybody. Roman law even addressed damages caused by cup grinders, which tells you the diatretari's work was valuable enough to need legal protection. We don't have their names. We don't have their workshops. We don't have a manual describing how they controlled a cutting wheel closely enough to leave a strut a few millimeters thick standing free in space, or how they calculated a nanoparticle ratio they had no instrument capable of measuring. What we have is the objects themselves, fewer than 50 of them, scattered across museums, most in fragments, one of them changing color in a case in London right now. The technique died with the people who knew it. Modern glassmakers with electron microscopes, computer modeling, and centuries of accumulated material science have only recently managed to reproduce the dichroic effect in a lab setting, and even now, largely by simulation rather than reliably reproducing the ancient method by hand. The Romans did it with a grinding wheel, sand, water, and whatever knowledge got passed from one diatretarius to the next. That's the part we're sitting with. Not that the Lycurgus Cup is pretty, that somewhere in the 4th century, someone solved a material science problem we didn't have the tools to explain for another 1600 years, and then that knowledge just vanished.